Washington, not to work just for the giant drug companies. It's time to work for people like Jordan's mom.
Yeah.
Can we agree on that? Okay. So how do we do that? Let me start with just kind of how the world looks on this stuff on prescription drugs. Do you know that about 90% of prescriptions are actually for generic drugs? And insulin would be a good example if there were generic drug manufacturers making it. Because the thing is, insulin's been around nearly 100 years to treat diabetes. Anybody in here, think about it, insulin, high blood pressure medication, certain pain medications, cholesterol medication, EpiPens, right? A lot of things that people get are covered as generic drugs. And the whole idea was, way back when, the way the market was going to work is we give these drug companies 6 years, a handful of years, that they could exclusively market a drug, then it would be available to everybody. That would drive the price down to just basically the cost of ingredients plus a little profit, and everybody would get access to these drugs at a low cost. Only the reality is that hadn't worked. It hadn't even come close to working. So what we have right now is we have a drug market where for about 40% of generic drugs, there are 0 or 1 manufacturers. You want to guess how the pricing works on that? Yeah. And for about 60% of the drugs, there are 0, 1, or 2. Okay, so we're not getting those markets to work. So here's my proposal. My proposal is if we've got a generic drug like that, and we've either got 0, 1, or 2 manufacturers out there, we haven't got any real competition, prices either through the roof or for ones where there's not much of a market, they don't even bring it to market and they keep selling their variation that's under patent or don't even make the drug at all. What I propose is that the federal government contract to have those generic drugs made and then offer them available to anybody who has the prescription on a cost-plus basis. Bring the cost down for real families. That's something we can do. And if it's a mass shooting, it makes a headline, and day after day, children who are killed, if it's not something that catches the media attention, it goes unremarked. That's wrong. It is morally wrong. And we have an obligation to protect our children, and that starts with gun safety. It starts with gun safety. So, let's think about it this way. We have an obligation to act. What could we do? There is a long, long list of what we could do. For example, and things that people on both sides of the aisle, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, can agree on. Things that gun owners can agree on. More sensible background checks, right? How about that? In fact, let me tell you what we tried a couple of years ago. If you're on the terrorist watch list, you probably shouldn't be able to buy a gun. NRA block them. Never even got a vote. No fly, no buy. There's one we ought to be able to do, right? Weapons of war should not be available on our streets. Actually, let me do one more. We need to treat gun violence like the public health emergency that it is, and do real research on what works. What can we do better, safer? And that takes us back to the same point. And that is that right now in Washington, the NRA holds Congress hostage. And the only way that's going to change is if we get out there and say enough is enough. We're not doing this anymore. So I'm ready to fight back against the NRA. Ready to fight this. Thank you. So let me start by saying just how sorry I am, Catherine, and how lucky your son is to have a mother who fights for him. Thank you. Look, our veterans are people who signed up and who put it all on the line. They agreed to put their lives at risk to keep the rest of us safe. And that means that we owe them a sacred obligation. And it's not just about parades. It's not just about saying thank you, those are great. But it means we have to fulfill our promises. And one of those promises to our veterans is that when you're sick, when you're injured, when you get hurt, when you come home, we are there for you 110%, all the way through. All the way through. So, yeah, part of it is we just got to keep this one front and center. We need a VA. Look, and I meet lots of good people who work at the VA. I actually want to make that clear. I go visit our VA hospitals. There are people who have dedicated their lives, people who could be making a lot more money if they worked somewhere else. But I meet nurses, I meet physical therapists, I meet doctors who are truly dedicated to the mission. But we've got a system that's broken. And we've got a system that's still working at cross purposes with itself. A system that says, for example, let's keep trying to delay the costs of veterans' care. And how to do that? Well, when they're sick, you kind of push it out. Shoot, if they're still in the military, when they start showing that they've got problems, give them an other than honorable discharge so that they won't be eligible for any health care, regardless of how those injuries occurred. That is obscene for the United States government to do that. Who you just keep putting them off, cancel the appointment, move it on, roll it out, over and over and over. Part of this is not wanting to acknowledge the costs of sending people to war, because the cost of sending people to war is the cost also of taking care of all of those who come back home. Those who are trying to privatize, who are trying to get folks out of the VA on the notion that somehow they're going to be better off in the private healthcare system, where the costs just keep going up, and where our veterans, and sometimes the things that are very unique to the problems of our veterans, just get lost because people don't understand it and don't see it. So for me, man, this is a moral question. This is, what does it mean to be a good citizen of the United States of America? And it means standing up for our veterans, and it means demanding a VA hospital that works for everyone. Let's talk taxes. Jenny makes a really good point about, you always want to understand the details of the tax system, not the headline that the folks who are promoting it put out. And I just want to roll forward. Jenny's still unhappy about what happened with taxes in the Reagan administration. I got you, Jenny, but it hasn't gotten better since then. And a little over a year ago, just keep in mind, you want to understand the difference between political parties in America? A little over a year ago, in Congress, in the space of just a few weeks, the Republicans, and I mean every single Republican, without a single Democratic vote, gave away about $1 trillion to billionaires, millionaires, and giant corporations. Yep. Yeah, think about that. That tells you who that government works for. In fact, a couple of them got caught with their pants around their ankles, explaining that they had to do this quickly because their big donors had said, you don't get through my tax break, don't come back for a political contribution. Can we just say corruption again?
Yeah. Corruption!
Yeah. Okay. So, first of all, I think that's wrong. And And I think we ought to roll this back for the billionaires, the giant corporations. But I want to think about this another way. This gives me a chance. Jenny gave me an opening here, and I'm going to take it because it matters to me. And that is, I think it is time to put a modest tax on the giant fortunes in this country. So, everybody who's got more than $50 million, think about that, in assets, ought to be paying 2% a year back into the kitty to help support the country that helped them get rich. Now, I think of this as basic fairness. And here's how I want you just to see the basic fairness part of this. The top, right now in America, this year, the top 0.1% is going to pay about 3.2% all in of their total wealth in taxes. The 99.9%, are there a few 99.9%? A handful of you maybe are in that part. The 99.9% are going to be paying on average about 7.2% of your total wealth all in taxes. This just isn't fair. I'm tired of billionaire freeloaders.
Yeah.
I want everybody to pay a fair share to keep this dollars covered. And here's the other half. Is I want them to pay it because it goes back to where I see all of this. We've got to create some opportunity in this family, in this country. Back in the 1940s, a kid born back then, a child back then, had a better than 90% chance of doing better than their folks. Right? By the time we get to the 1980s, it's about 50-50. Today, we could be the first generation in American history where our children will do significantly worse than we did. How do we keep that from happening? How do we reverse that? We ask everybody to pay a fair share, and then we put that money into opportunity for our kids. We put it into universal child care. We put it into reducing the student loan debt burden. We put it into building a 21st century infrastructure so we have good jobs right here in America. We put it into our future. That's what it's all about. I alluded to this earlier, but this one is personal for me. My shot at becoming a public school teacher was a commuter college that cost $50 a semester. For a price that I could pay for and a part-time waitressing job, I could get a 4-year diploma that catapulted me into America's middle class. That opportunity is not out there for kids today, and that is fundamentally wrong. That's just wrong. So, we gotta have college where every kid has a chance to get an education, whether it's a technical education post-high school, whether it's a 4-year diploma, whether it's a master's degree. It's every part of it without going into debt. That has to be the center of what we're looking for. And Jared says, because he has 3 younger brothers, right? Okay, I'm all for that. But remember the part about $10,000 and $20,000 and $30,000 in student loan debt. Let's just talk about this as a country. Right now, we have $1.5 trillion in student loan debt in America. Think about it this way. Every year, some kids go off to college, some kids graduate from college, some kids finish paying off their loans. Since the population isn't growing very much, you'd expect that student loan debt burden to stay about the same. The interest rates are so high, so many people are struggling to pay, so much in fees, so much in default, that snowball of debt is growing by $100 billion a year. What of a country saddles its young people with $1.5 trillion in debt, while it gives away more than $1 trillion to billionaires and giant corporations. Wrong is wrong. So what can we do about it? Okay, I got to tell you this one quick thing. So I got elected to the Senate back in 2012, going into 2013. The first bill that I put in was to refinance student loan debt. Now, it was a little cheeky, I will admit. My proposal was that our students, or people who have taken out student loan debt, should pay the same interest rate as Wells Fargo and Citibank when they're borrowing from the Fed. It's all just an investment. By the way, when I did that, you know how many co-sponsors I had? 0. Because it was so far out there. So part of the answer has been that people now get up and talk about this. And it's important. You know, debt carries a lot of stigma with it. People have carried around rocks on their back for a long time. Everybody keeps smiling and shaking hands, and the debts get harder and harder and harder. So, I'm going to give one more pitch to my wealth tax, right? That wealth tax I was telling you about, 2% on fortunes greater than $50 million a year. That would produce $2.75 trillion over the next 10 years. Can we say things like universal child care, early learning, investment in public schools, and reduce our student loan debt program?
Yeah.
Okay. I think it increases the power of the lobbyists. Because you better believe when folks in the state legislature or in Congress can only stay for 6 years, 8 years, the lobbyists will be there for 12 and 14 and 20. And they're the ones who will understand the game, and everybody new who comes in the door is ripe for the picking. So I have not been a fan of term limits. What I believe is in voting and accountability at the ballot box. Let's go get those guys who don't vote in our favor. Right? That's where I am. News. Yeah, news, right. You just want to block it out, right? Okay, so actually, I think that's a really interesting point. I'll try to do a short answer on it, but I think of this as just part of the ongoing attack on democracy. So, 30 years now, Republicans have been trying to undermine voting. That's one big attack on democracy, right? Voter suppression, gerrymandering, and a little gerrymandering on both sides, right? But trying to attack voting because the vote is what lets us true up over time. Attacks on an independent judiciary, a Supreme Court that not only tilts against women's rights, but tilts deeply in favor of big corporations. And that means against workers' rights, consumers' rights, small business rights. That's another attack on democracy. Those foundational pieces we count on. We count on voting. We count on an independent judiciary. And the third one is we count on an independent media. We count on news that's honest and true as best it can be. And when the Republicans, and it is the Republicans, want to, Donald Trump and the fake news business, it's a way of saying, you can't hold me accountable. You're not out there. See, that's how it works. In between elections, it's the media that gets out there and holds every elected official accountable. That gets out there and tells what you're up to. That gets out there and explains what those votes are that are coming up and who's lobbying and where the money is coming from. And they don't want to hear that. So we're caught in this moment, not just where we disagree with each other, it's This really goes back to Steve's point. We're caught in this moment when the very foundations of democracy are under attack. This is a scary moment for our country, but it is also a moment of great opportunity. This is the moment when democracy is starting to reinvent itself. When how we understand, how we participate, how we make our government responsive is fundamentally changing. Think about it this way. 3 years ago, there wasn't even a group called Indivisible. Today, they're all over America, out there making their voices heard. Organizations that have been around for a long time have been revitalized. 1 million new members who come in for women's groups and say, we're going to be in this fight. For Emily's List, who say, we're going to help women get elected, are in it. It's like, this is the moment. This is the big contest. And we saw it in 2016, and boy, we fumbled that one bad. Right? Bad. No, bad. But we came back. We still had, I still remember this. I went to see the inauguration. I was there. I come from a faith tradition of witnessing. I'm serious. You go and you look. I think it's important. I felt like it was part of my responsibility. From me to Reverend Speed, when he was sworn in, is burned in my eyeballs. Forever. But that turns out to be a good thing. You know, if there's ever a moment I'm a little down, I'm thinking, time to kick back, rest a little. I close my eyes, I see him get sworn in. I'm like, I'm back.